72 warships surrounded the human colonies, not drifting, not waiting, locked. Every weapon system aligned, every calculation complete, every outcome already decided. This was not a battle. This was an ending. Across the fleet, no one spoke. They had done this before. Different species, different worlds, same result. Resistance lasted minutes, sometimes hours, never longer. And then something appeared. One signal, no encryption, no distortion, no attempt to hide, clean, direct. Intentional, connect us to every ship. A pause, then, not your command, not your leaders, everyone. That had never been requested before. On the flagship, a senior officer frowned. That violates standard structure. Another voice, quieter. They're not asking for permission. Silence. Then the commander made a decision. Accept it. Across 72 warships, every screen activated at once, every crew member, every officer, every observer, all watching the same thing. A human. No insignia, no rank markers, no visible stress, just sitting there, looking at them. Calm. Too calm. The commander stepped forward. You are facing full extermination protocol, he said. This is your final opportunity to respond. The human didn't react immediately, didn't rush, didn't argue, just studied them. Then, very quietly, asked, how many of you actually believe this is justified? No one answered, because the question wasn't directed at command, it was directed at them, individually. And in that moment, before a single shot was fired, the structure of the fleet cracked. The silence didn't break, it spread. At first it was subtle, a hesitation in posture, a delayed response on internal channels, eyes shifting just slightly away from command displays. 72 ships, thousands of individuals, all connected, all watching. And for the first time since the fleet had formed, they weren't thinking as one. On the flagship, Commander Rathan felt it immediately. Not as sound, not as movement, but as absence. The absence of certainty. He straightened slightly. Maintain focus, he said. His voice carried across command channels, sharp and controlled. Do not engage with the transmission beyond directive parameters. Too late. The human on screen leaned forward, just a fraction. Not enough to signal aggression, just enough to signal attention. You didn't answer, the human said. Still calm, still measured. Rathan narrowed his eyes. This is not a forum for debate. A pause. Then the human nodded. Of course, they said, but that's not what I asked. Across multiple ships, low-level chatter began to rise. Muted at first, then building. Questions, private channels opening. Is this part of the protocol? Why address all personnel? Why not command only? Rathan's jaw tightened. Silence all non-essential communications. A technician hesitated, just for a second, then complied. But the delay had already done damage. The human noticed. Of course they did. You're not used to that, the human said. No accusation, just observation. Delay. Rathan stepped closer to the main display. You are attempting to disrupt operational cohesion. Another pause. Then, something unexpected. The human smiled. Not mockery, not arrogance, recognition. Yes, they said, I am. That landed harder than any threat. No denial, no deflection, just truth. And that made it worse. On a carrier vessel positioned 3 sectors behind the flagship, a junior officer leaned toward their console. Why would they admit that? They whispered. No one answered, because the answer was forming, slowly, in the back of their mind. The human wasn't trying to hide anything. They didn't need to. Back on the flagship, Rathan changed approach. State your purpose clearly, he said. Now, the human exhaled softly. Not tired, not nervous, just patient. I want you to stop, they said. Simple, direct, impossible. That is not within your authority, Rathan replied immediately. I know, the human said. Another pause. Then, the shift. I'm not speaking to your authority. A beat. I'm speaking to you. That was the second fracture, smaller than the first, but deeper, because now it was personal. Across the fleet, individuals began to process something they hadn't needed to process in a long time. Choice. Real choice. Not assigned roles. Not structured obedience. Choice. On one of the outer ships, an experienced pilot leaned back slightly in their seat. "This isn't right," they muttered. Beside them, another officer responded quickly, "Stay on task." But their voice lacked conviction, because they were thinking the same thing. Back on screen, the human continued. "You've done this before," they said. "Many times." No response. "You already know how this ends." Still nothing. The human tilted their head slightly. But this time, a small pause. "You're being watched by each other." That landed. Hard. Rethan felt it, like pressure building behind the structure he had trusted for years. Command worked because it was vertical, top-down, clear, controlled. But now, it wasn't vertical anymore. It was horizontal, shared, visible, unstable. "You're creating doubt," Rathan said. "Yes," the human replied, immediate, unapologetic. "Because doubt means you're thinking." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was active. Across 72 warships, thousands of minds, no longer aligned. And the human, still sitting there, still calm, watching it happen, not forcing it, not rushing it, just letting it unfold, like they knew exactly how long this would take and exactly what would happen next. The first crack had formed, the second had spread, and somewhere deep inside the structure of the fleet, something that had always been stable was starting to fail. The shift didn't stop. It deepened. At first, command assumed it could be contained. A controlled disruption, a temporary anomaly, something procedural, something fixable. But it wasn't, because the human wasn't attacking systems. They were doing something far more dangerous. They were giving people time to think. On the flagship, Commander Rathan turned slightly, cut the transmission. A technician froze, just for a fraction of a second. Then, "Sir, it's already mirrored across internal channels." Rathan's expression hardened. "Override it?" "I'm trying." Another pause, longer this time. "It's not centralized anymore." That was the third fracture, and this one didn't make a sound. Across the fleet, the human's image remained, stable, uninterrupted, watching, waiting, like they expected this, like this was part of the plan. "You're losing control," the human said quietly. Rathan didn't respond immediately. He couldn't, because for the first time, it wasn't entirely false. "You misunderstand your position," he said finally. "You are not in control of this situation." The human nodded slightly. "I know." A beat. "Neither are you." That landed harder than anything before. Not because it was aggressive, but because it was precise. Across multiple ships, officers began checking their own command permissions, reconfirming access, verifying authority layers. Everything still worked, technically, and yet something fundamental had shifted. Orders were still being issued, but they weren't being followed the same way, not immediately, not blindly. There was a delay now, a gap, small but growing. On a midline cruiser, an operations officer muted their console feed for half a second, just long enough to whisper, "Do you think this is wrong?" The response came instantly. "You shouldn't be asking that." "I know." A pause. "But I am." Back on the flagship, Rathan changed tactics again. "If you have a proposal, state it," he said. "Clearly!" The human leaned back slightly. Finally, movement, subtle, controlled. "I do," they said, "and you're not going to like it." No reaction from Rathan, but several officers nearby shifted their stance, attention tightening. "I'm going to ask you to pause all offensive action for the next 120 minutes. Immediate response. Denied. No hesitation, no consideration, just protocol." The human didn't react, didn't push, didn't argue. "Of course," they said. Then to the fourth fracture, "You weren't expected to agree." Silence, again, but different now, because this time it felt like a setup. Across the fleet, curiosity spiked, not confusion, not fear, something sharper. What happens in 120 minutes? Someone whispered on a closed channel. No answer, not yet. The human's gaze shifted slightly. Not scanning, not searching, selecting. You have 17 ships in your formation, the human said, whose captains have filed formal ethical objections in previous operations. Rethan's eyes narrowed. That information was not public. You have 9 more, the human continued, who have requested reassignment from correction fleets at least once, a beat, and 3 who delayed execution orders beyond acceptable thresholds. Now, movement, real movement. Officers turning, looking at each other, not openly, but enough. Enough to be seen. Rethan's voice dropped slightly. Where did you get that information? The human met his gaze. You already know the answer to that. No elaboration, no explanation, because none was needed. The implication was enough. They had done the work, all of it. Across 72 ships, names were being remembered, records, moments, decisions people thought had disappeared into protocol, now surfacing, visible, shared. You're not a unified force, the human said. Not an insult, a statement. You're a collection of individuals operating under the assumption that no one is paying attention. Another pause. Then, softly, I am. That was the moment everything changed. Because now, it wasn't abstract anymore. It wasn't about orders or command or structure. It was about them, individually. What they had done, what they had questioned, what they had ignored, and what they were about to do next. On one of the forward assault ships, a captain leaned forward slowly. "Commander!" Their voice was steady, but something underneath it wasn't. "We need clarification." That word, clarification, had never been part of a final strike sequence before. Back on the flagship, Rathan didn't turn, didn't acknowledge it immediately, because acknowledging it would make it real, and it was already spreading, faster now, more visible, the delay between orders increasing, the certainty decreasing, and at the center of it all, one human, sitting still, doing almost nothing, and dismantling everything. The timer had started, 120 minutes, and for the first time since the fleet had formed, they were no longer counting down to destruction. They were counting down to a decision. By minute 12, the fleet had stopped behaving like a weapon. It still looked like one. 72 warships, formation intact, engines balanced, weapons hot. From a distance, nothing had changed. Inside the command structure, everything had. Requests for clarification became requests for review. Requests for review became demands for confirmation. And confirmation was the one thing Commander Rathan could no longer provide. He stood at the center of the flagship's command deck and watched the status lattice shift color by color across the main display. Not red, not failure. Worse, amber, questioning, pending, unresolved. The human remained on every screen, still seated, still calm. No threats, no raised voice, no grand speech, just pressure, applied in exactly the right place. "You've had your effect," Rathan said, each word clipped and deliberate. "Now state what happens at the end of your 120 minutes. The human looked at him for a long moment, then answered. "At the end of 120 minutes, your fleet will receive a packet." No one spoke. Rathan's eyes narrowed. "What packet?" "A record," the human said. "Verified, indexed, cross-referenced. It contains operational objections, internal objections, procedural inconsistencies, command deviations, suppressed reviews, and the complete chain of authorization behind this strike. A beat. It also contains the names of everyone who tried to stop it. That changed the room. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Enough for officers across the flagship to stop pretending this was ordinary. Because suddenly, this was no longer just about the legality of the operation. It was about memory, history, responsibility. Who would be remembered for what? On a destroyer in the outer ring, one tactical officer whispered, "They archived us." Beside them, another replied, "No, they understood us." That was worse. because systems could be fought, records could be denied. But being understood, being seen clearly, that stripped away every excuse. On the flagship, Rathan folded his hands behind his back. "You are attempting to create fear of future consequence." The human gave a small nod. "Yes." Again, no denial, no performance, just truth. "But not for the reason you think." Rathan said nothing. The human continued. "Fear is temporary. Records are permanent. I'm not offering consequence. I'm offering visibility." That word moved through the fleet like a current. Visibility. Not punishment, not revenge, exposure. On one ship, a captain requested direct command review. On another, 2 senior officers formally paused local strike prep pending legal clarification. On a third, the weapons chief simply removed their hands from the firing interface and waited. Small acts, separate acts, but together they formed a pattern. And patterns were dangerous, especially when command could see them forming in real time. Rathan turned to his communications officer. "How many ships have reduced readiness posture?" The officer checked, hesitated, then answered. 11 confirmed, 7 more under review." The number hit the room like cold air. 18 ships, a quarter of the fleet, not gone, not rebellious, just no longer automatic. Rathan looked back to the screen. "You are very confident for someone with no leverage." For the first time, the human smiled with something almost like sadness. "That's where you're wrong, Commander." A pause. "My leverage is that many of your people already know." Another beat. "They just needed someone to say it first." That was the 5th fracture. Not doubt, not delay, recognition. The fleet was not being changed by new information. It was being changed by spoken truth. Truth that had existed in fragments, in private reports, in delayed signatures, in hesitations no one acknowledged. The human had not created the weakness. They had revealed it. And once revealed, it could no longer be unseen. On one of the heavy carriers, Captain Sorrel opened a ship-wide officer channel. That alone was unusual. What they said next was worse. "All department heads," Sorrel said, voice steady, "submit readiness confirmation only if you are personally willing to defend this action before full interspecies review." No one on the bridge moved, because everyone there understood what had just happened. The question had changed. It was no longer, "Can we do this?" Now it was, "Will you own it?" Across the fleet, replies slowed. Some officers submitted confirmations immediately, others didn't, others couldn't, and every silence meant something. Back on the flagship, Rathan felt command, slipping into a shape he could no longer predict. He had spent his entire career mastering clear systems, input, order, execution, cause and effect. That was how fleets survived. That was how they remained coherent under pressure. But this pressure was different. It wasn't force, it was conscience, and conscience scaled badly. Once one person hesitated, another noticed. Once another noticed, they asked why. Once that question spread, obedience became a choice. And any commander who had to rely on chosen obedience during an extermination order had already lost something vital. "You think this makes you powerful," Rathan said. The humans shook their head. "No." A beat. "I think this makes you responsible." The words landed harder than accusation ever could, because accusation could be resisted. Responsibility had to be carried. A low alert tone pulsed across the flagship. Not combat. Internal priority routing. 3 captains requesting emergency ethics review. 2 legal officers requesting validation of strike authority. 1 senior navigator requesting written confirmation that colony civilian counts had been independently verified. Rathan looked at the incoming notices and for the first time that day said nothing. The command deck around him grew very still. The human watched him, not triumphantly, not cruelly, just attentively. Like this moment mattered, like what he chose next would define more than a battle. Maybe more than a career, maybe more than a fleet. "What do you want from me?" Rathan asked at last. And this time, it wasn't a command. It was a real question. The human answered immediately. I want you to stop hiding inside procedure. Rathan's jaw tightened. I am following lawful structure. No, the human said, still calm. You are standing near it. That cut deeper than anything before, because everyone hearing it knew the difference. Lawful structure required confidence, evidence, clarity. What the fleet had now was motion without certainty, power without unity, procedure without belief. The human leaned closer to the camera by less than an inch. You don't need another order, Commander. A pause. You need one honest sentence. No one breathed. Not on the flagship, not on the outer ships, not anywhere the transmission reached. Rathan stared at the screen, at the human, at the impossible calm in their face. Then his gaze shifted to the tactical display beside him. 72 ships, still in formation, still armed, still capable of ending millions of lives. And yet the real center of the battle was no longer the formation. It was this. A command deck, a question, a sentence waiting to be spoken. Minutes passed. Not many. Enough. Then from the outer line, a transmission request hit the flagship's priority channel. Captain Sorrel. Rathan accepted. The captain appeared on a side display, posture rigid. Commander, Sorrel said, my senior staff will not proceed without direct affirmation from Fleet Command that this operation remains legally and ethically sound. Rathan held their gaze. Another request appeared, then another, then 4 more. He didn't need the count. He understood the pattern now. The fleet wasn't breaking apart. It was waking up, and waking up fleets were harder to control than hostile ones, because hostile fleets still moved with purpose. This was judgment. Distributed, personal, irreversible. The human spoke one more time, quietly, almost gently. You asked what happens in 120 minutes. Rathan looked back at the screen. The human's expression didn't change. You do, they said. The answer didn't come immediately, and that was the point. For the first time since the fleet had formed, time was no longer moving forward with certainty. It was stretching, each second carrying weight, each silence meaning something. Commander Rathan didn't speak, not because he had nothing to say, but because anything he said now would matter. Across the fleet, every channel remained open. No one muted the transmission, no one looked away, because they all understood something instinctively. This was the moment, not the firing command, not the strike. This, on the outer edge of formation, a weapons officer stared at their console. Targeting solutions were still active, coordinates locked, authorization pending. They had executed this sequence before, dozens of times. It had always felt clean, clear, necessary. Now it felt different. Sir, they said quietly, not taking their eyes off the display, requesting confirmation. Their commanding officer didn't answer right away, because they were listening, not to the request, to the silence behind it. Back on the flagship, Rathan stepped closer to the central console. His reflection flickered faintly across the surface. For a moment, he didn't look like a commander. He looked like someone being watched, because he was. 72 ships, thousands of eyes, and one human who had said almost nothing and changed everything. You've engineered this, Rathan said slowly. The human shook their head. No, a beat. I just removed the parts that were holding it together. That landed deeper than anything before, because it was true. The structure hadn't been destroyed. It had been revealed, and what had been revealed was unstable. Across multiple ships, officers began reviewing the same data independently, not because they were told to, because they wanted to. That alone was unprecedented. Choice had spread, quietly, irreversibly. On a forward command vessel, a senior analyst spoke under their breath. They didn't bring a weapon. Beside them, another responded, no. A pause. They made us one. Back on the flagship, Rathan's hand hovered just above the command interface. One motion. That was all it would take. One confirmation. And everything would return to order. The fleet would move. The hesitation would collapse under momentum. The system would correct itself, it always had. But now, he understood the cost. Because this time, they would remember every hesitation, every doubt, every unanswered question. And once something was remembered, it couldn't be undone. "You're asking me to break command structure," Raytheon said. The human's gaze didn't waver. "No," a pause. "I'm asking you to decide if it deserves to hold." That was the difference. And everyone listening felt it, because one was rebellion, the other was judgment. On a mid-range cruiser, a captain closed their eyes briefly, then opened a fleet-side channel, not command, open, unrestricted. "If there are unresolved objections," they said, voice steady, "state them now." The response didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, fragments. One officer, then another, then 5 more. Not loud, not chaotic. Clear, measured, honest. And that was worse than disorder, because it couldn't be dismissed. Back on the flagship, the incoming transmissions stacked faster now, too fast to ignore, too structured to silence. Raytheon exhaled slowly. For the first time, he was no longer managing the fleet. He was part of it, one voice among many, and that realization settled heavily, because it meant something simple. He couldn't hide behind command anymore. The human watched him carefully, still not pushing, still not rushing, because they knew. This wasn't about pressure anymore. This was about inevitability. "You already know what happens if you give the order," the human said quietly. Raytheon didn't respond. "You also know what happens if you don't." A longer pause. The fleet waited, not for command, for him, individually. That was new, that was dangerous, that was human. Raytheon's hand lowered, not to the command interface, to his side. A small movement, but across 72 ships, it was seen and understood. He turned slightly toward the comm station. "Open fleet-wide channel," he said. No hesitation this time. The channel opened instantly. Every ship, every officer, every crew member. Connected. Raytheon stood in the center of the command deck, not above them, with them, and for a brief moment he said nothing, because now silence wasn't weakness. It was space. Space for something real. Then finally, he spoke. "This operation," a pause, small but absolute, "is no longer proceeding under certainty." The words moved through the fleet like a shockwave, not loud, not explosive, but irreversible. Raytheon continued. "Until full legal and ethical validation is confirmed." Another pause, longer this time. "All offensive actions are suspended." That was it. No dramatic tone, no declaration, just a decision. And it was enough. Across 72 warships, weapons powered down, not instantly, not perfectly synchronized, but steadily, one by one, system by system, until the formation that had arrived as an ending became something else, uncertain, unresolved, alive. On the screen, the human finally leaned back, just slightly, like they had been waiting for that exact sentence, nothing more, nothing less. Raytheon looked at them. "Your 120 minutes aren't over," he said. The human nodded. "I know." A small pause. Then, "Now they matter." And for the first time since the fleet had arrived, no one was thinking about pulling the trigger. They were thinking about what came next, which was exactly where the human wanted them. For a few seconds, no one moved, not out of confusion, not out of delay, but because something unfamiliar had taken hold across the fleet. Permission was no longer automatic. On the flagship, the tactical display shifted again. Weapons inactive, target locks released, engagement protocols suspended. Commander Raytheon stood still, watching the cascade of changes ripple outward. 72 ships, no longer a single force. Now, 72 decisions. Behind him, a junior officer spoke, barely above a whisper. "Sir, command authority is fragmenting." Raytheon didn't turn. "I know." And he did, because he could feel it. Not as loss, as transformation. The structure hadn't collapsed, it had changed shape, and that made it unpredictable. On one of the outer vessels, Captain Sorrell remained standing at the center of their bridge. Their crew was waiting, not for orders, for direction. There was a difference now, a real one. Maintain defensive posture, Sorel said. No one questioned it, but no one rushed either. Every movement carried thought, deliberation, ownership. Back on the flagship, the human was still there, still connected, still present on every screen. But now, they weren't the center anymore. The fleet was, its people, its choices, its fractures. You've created instability, Raytheon said. The human tilted their head slightly. No, they replied. I revealed it. A pause. Then, you were stable when no one was looking closely. That line spread faster than any command because it felt true. Across multiple ships, officers began pulling internal records, old mission logs, delayed transmissions, requests that had been acknowledged but never answered. Patterns emerged, not new ones, old ones, ignored ones. And now they were being seen together, at once. That was the danger. Not information, connection. On a midline cruiser, a systems analyst leaned toward their console. I'm seeing overlap in authorization chains, they said. Their superior stepped closer. Explain. The same arbitration group approved 3 separate correction mandates. A pause. With identical justification language. Silence. Because that wasn't supposed to happen. Not in a system built on precision. Back on the flagship, another alert appeared. Then another. Then 5 more. Not threats, not external signals, internal flags, questions, challenges, requests for audit. Raytheon watched them stack. He could stop it, technically. He still had override authority. He could silence channels, lock permissions, force compliance. He had done it before, many times. But now, he understood what that would mean. It wouldn't restore order. It would confirm everything the human had implied. And once confirmed, there would be no going back. You're pushing them toward defiance, Raytheon said. The humans shook their head. No, a beat. I'm giving them permission to notice. Oh, that was worse, because defiance could be punished. Noticing couldn't. Once someone saw a pattern, they couldn't unsee it. Once someone asked a question, they couldn't unknow it. And across 72 ships, those questions were multiplying. On a forward assault vessel, a weapons chief removed their access key from the console. Not dramatically, not publicly, just quietly, set it down beside them, then folded their hands, waiting, choosing not to act. That single decision replicated on another ship, then another. Not coordinated, not commanded, shared. Back on the flagship, Raytheon finally turned away from the main display, not to escape it, to face something else. His crew, they were watching him, not as subordinates, as people, waiting to see who he would be next, commander or participant. That was the choice now, and it wasn't written anywhere. The humans spoke again, softly. You can still end this, they said. Raytheon looked back at the screen. You've already taken that option away. The human held his gaze. No. A pause. I made it visible. Another beat. You can still give the order. Silence. Because they both knew that was true. Technically, nothing had been lost. The fleet still had power, still had weapons, still had the ability to complete its mission. But something else had changed, something more important, belief. And without belief, orders became requests, and requests could be refused. On the command deck, a senior officer stepped forward. Sir, we're receiving a consolidated inquiry from 19 ships. Raytheon didn't ask what it was. He already knew. Read it. The officer hesitated, then complied. Request for immediate fleet-wide ethical verification of mandate legitimacy prior to continuation of operation. A long pause. Then, they're asking for confirmation, the officer added. Raytheon almost smiled, not because it was amusing, because it was inevitable. The human had been right. They weren't breaking the fleet. They were waking it up, and a fleet that was awake couldn't be used the same way. Raytheon looked down briefly, then back up, decisions settling into place. Not sudden, not forced, earned. Transmit response, he said. The officer straightened. Content, sir? Raytheon didn't hesitate this time. Tell them the truth. The words landed across the command deck like gravity. Heavy, final, irreversible. On the screen, the human watched. Still calm, still patient, because they knew this wasn't the end. This was the point where everything became real. Across 72 warships, the question was no longer, what are our orders? Now it was, what are we willing to stand behind? And for the first time, no one had an immediate answer, which meant the human had already won something far more important than a battle. They had changed the question. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It spread, slowly, unevenly, like light reaching places that had stayed in shadow for too long. Across the fleet, Raytheon's response propagated through command channels, then secondary systems, then personal interfaces, unfiltered, unmodified, unavoidable. There was no speech, no justification, no framing, just data, raw, cross-referenced, verified, and attached to it. One line, review before action. That was enough. On a reconnaissance vessel near the edge of formation, a navigation officer stopped mid-calculation. Their screen had shifted. New files, old files, things they had never seen before but somehow recognized. This doesn't match prior reports, they said. Behind them, their superior leaned in. It was never meant to. Back on the flagship, silence returned, but not the same silence as before. This one was active, processing, thousands of minds moving through the same realization at different speeds, some fast, some slow, some resisting, some already accepting. The human watched it all, not intervening, not guiding, because this phase didn't require them anymore. The system was doing it to itself. You've stepped back, Raytheon said. The human nodded. Yes. A pause. You don't need me for this part. That was the final shift. The moment the human stopped being the force and became the catalyst. Across the fleet, reactions began to diverge. On some ships, acceptance came quickly. Weapons remained offline. Command structures adjusted. Officers began documenting everything. Carefully, precisely. On others, resistance, denial, attempts to reassert order, data integrity not confirmed, source chain incomplete, continue with original directive. But even there, the delay remained, because now every order required thought, and thought took time. On a heavy cruiser positioned near the center of formation, a senior tactical officer slammed their hand lightly against the console. This changes nothing, they said, but their voice lacked certainty, because deep down, they knew it changed everything. Back on the flagship, incoming reports filled the command interface. Not combat data, not threat analysis, internal status, ethical review requests, authorization challenges, command confirmations pending. The system wasn't collapsing, it was questioning itself. And that was something it had never been designed to do at scale. Raytheon stood still, absorbing it. Every signal, every hesitation, every shift. This was always your plan, he said. The human considered that, then shook their head. No, a beat. This was always your structure. Another pause. I just trusted it to react honestly. Once it could see itself clearly, that was the difference. The human hadn't imposed anything. They had revealed something, and the fleet, for all its discipline, could not ignore what it saw. On an outer assault ship, Captain Vorin opened a direct channel to 3 nearby vessels. Status? The responses came back one by one. Weapons offline. Awaiting review. Command divided. No action taken. Standing by. No engagement. Vorin exhaled slowly, then made a decision. Transmit to all local units, they said. Hold position. No independent action. That wasn't defiance. It wasn't obedience either. It was something new. Alignment through awareness. Back on the flagship, Raytheon finally moved, not toward the command console, toward the viewport. Beyond it, the fleet. 72 ships, still in formation, still powerful, but no longer unified in purpose, and that changed what they were. They'll ask what happened here, Raytheon said quietly. The human nodded. Yes. Another pause. And what will you tell them? Raythan asked. The human didn't answer immediately, because the answer mattered. Then, simply, the truth. Raythan almost laughed. Not because it was amusing, because it was inevitable. That word again, truth. It had done more damage to the operation than any weapon could have, because it didn't destroy. It revealed, and once revealed, everything else followed. Across the fleet, final confirmations began to settle, not uniform, not synchronized, but trending. More ships holding, more officers questioning, more systems paused than active. The balance had shifted, irreversibly. On the command deck, a final alert appeared. Fleet status summary. Raythan read it once, then again, then let out a slow breath. Majority non-compliant with immediate engagement, the system displayed. Not failure, not rebellion, non-compliance, a clinical word for something deeply human. Raythan turned back to the screen. The human was still there, still watching. But now, there was something different. Not distance, respect. You didn't stop us, Raythan said. The human shook their head. No, a beat. You stopped yourself. Silence. Then, understanding. Not complete, not comfortable, but real. Across 72 warships, the decision had been made, not by command, not by force, by accumulation. Of doubt, of truth, of choice. And once a decision like that formed, it couldn't be undone by a single order. The timer reached its final minutes, but no one was watching it anymore, because the outcome had already changed. This was no longer a countdown to destruction. It was the aftermath of realization, and realization was permanent. Raythan looked out at the fleet one last time, then spoke, quietly, not as a commander, as a participant. It's over. The human inclined their heads slightly. Not victory, not relief, acknowledgement. Yes, they said, it is. But both of them knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the point where it truly began. Nothing fired. That was the first thing history would record. 72 warships, full authorization, complete targeting solutions, and not a single shot. From the outside, it would look impossible. From the inside, it felt inevitable. Across the fleet, systems remained active but restrained, not shut down, not abandoned, held, like a breath that no one was willing to release. On the flagship, Commander Raythan stood alone for a moment, not physically, but in position, because command, as it had existed, was gone, not destroyed, transformed. Around him, officers continued working, but differently now. No urgency, no blind execution. Everything filtered through something new. Awareness, responsibility, weight, status, Raythan said quietly. A systems officer responded. Fleet-wide weapons remain offline. Another voice followed. 83% of vessels have initiated independent review logs. A pause. Remaining ships, observing. Raythan nodded once. That was enough. Not perfect, not unified, but enough. On the central display, the human was still present, still connected, but no longer the focus. They had never tried to be. You're staying, Raythan said. Not a question. The human gave a small nod. For a while. A beat. Long enough to see what you choose to become next. That landed differently now. Before, it might have sounded like a tactic. Now, it sounded like trust. Across the fleet, conversations began to change. Not about execution, about meaning. On a mid-range cruiser, two officers sat side by side, reviewing the released data. One of them spoke first. I signed off on something like this once. The other didn't look at them. Do you still believe it was right? A long pause. I don't know. That was new. Admitting uncertainty, out loud, without consequence. On another ship, a captain addressed their crew. We were sent here to complete a directive, they said. That directive is now under review. A pause. And so are we. No resistance, no confusion, just acceptance. Because everyone understood what that meant. Back on the flagship, Raythan turned once more toward the viewport. The fleet still held formation, but it no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like a question. 72 ships asking the same thing in different ways. What now? You changed the outcome, Raytheon said. The humans shook their head. No, a beat. You changed it. Raytheon considered that, then nodded slightly, because he understood. The human hadn't forced anything. They had made it impossible not to choose. And that was harder, much harder. On the outer edge of the formation, a small patrol vessel broke silence. A simple transmission, unencrypted, fleet-wide. We are standing down. Another ship followed, then another, not coordinated, not commanded, shared, like a signal passing through them, until it reached the flagship. Raytheon listened. Every transmission, every voice, different tones, different words, same meaning. No one wanted to be the first to fire anymore. And once that threshold was crossed, it could never be uncrossed. The human leaned forward slightly, just enough to draw attention. One more thing, they said. Raytheon looked back at the screen. So far, you've stopped something, the human continued. A pause. Now you have to decide what replaces it. That was the final weight. Stopping was one thing. Replacing, that was harder, because it required direction, vision, responsibility beyond refusal. Across the fleet, that question settled, not urgent, not forced, but present, and it would remain. Long after this moment passed, Raytheon exhaled slowly, then gave a final command, not to attack, not to advance. Something else. Transmit fleet-wide, he said. The channel opened instantly. All ships, all crews, connected. Raytheon stood straight, not above them, with them, and spoke. This fleet will not carry out the current mandate. No hesitation, no qualifiers, just truth, a beat. Then we will return. Silence. Then movement. Engines adjusting, formations loosening, vectors shifting, not retreat, not defeat, decision. Across 72 warships, a new trajectory formed, away from destruction, towards something unknown. On the screen, the human finally allowed themselves the smallest change in expression. Not victory, not relief, recognition, like something had gone exactly as expected. Raytheon watched them for a moment, then asked the question that had been waiting since the beginning. Who are you? The human paused, just briefly, then answered, I'm the one you sent to talk to yourselves. Silence. Then, understanding. Not complete, but enough. The transmission ended shortly after. No dramatic cutoff, no final statement, just absence. And for the first time since the fleet had arrived, that absence didn't feel like loss. It felt like space. Space to decide, space to build, space to become something different. Raytheon remained at the viewport as the fleet began its departure. 72 warships, no longer an ending. Something else, something uncertain, something alive and far away. On a small, quiet channel, a human signal faded into silence. Mission complete. The news did not break. It unfolded, slowly, reluctantly, like something too large to be announced all at once. At first, it was just a delay. 72 warships had departed on a correction mandate. They were expected to report completion within a fixed window. They did not. That alone was unusual, not alarming, not yet. Then came the second anomaly. No debris, no combat signatures, no distress signals, no record of engagement. Just silence. On the central relay stations of the Galactic Council, analysts began requesting updates. Routine at first, then repeated, then escalated. Fleet status unavailable. Command channel unresponsive. Awaiting confirmation. The responses looped, identical, unhelpful. And that was when concern began to form, because fleets did not go silent. Not like this. Not without reason. 3 cycles later, the first transmission arrived, not from the Council, from the fleet. Unencrypted, unfiltered, public. That alone triggered immediate attention. Council transmissions were never public, not operational ones, not during active mandates. And yet, this one was. Across dozens of systems, receivers activated, screens lit up, observers paused, and the message played. Commander Raytheon appeared. No ceremonial posture, no formal backdrop, just a command deck, and a man who looked different, not weakened, not defeated, changed. "This is Fleet Command," he said, his voice steady, clear, but carrying something new. "This transmission is being broadcast openly." A pause. "Correction mandate has been suspended pending full ethical and legal review." That sentence alone fractured expectation across multiple systems. Suspended. That word didn't belong in that context, not with that kind of force, not at that stage. Rethan continued. "Supporting documentation has been attached and verified across independent channels." Another pause. "This fleet will not proceed under contested authority." Silence. Then the transmission ended. No explanation, no defense, just a statement, and attached to it, the data, the same truth, released now, not to 72 ships, but to the galaxy. On a distant trade world, a civilian analyst replayed the file 3 times before speaking. "This shouldn't exist." Beside them, another responded quietly. "But it does." And on a diplomatic station orbiting a neutral system, representatives from 6 species gathered around a shared display. No one spoke for a long time, because they were reading. And the more they read, the clearer it became. This was not an isolated error. This was a pattern, a system, quietly bending rules, quietly shaping outcomes, quietly deciding who would be corrected and why. On the Council's central world, the reaction was not immediate, because the structure there was designed to absorb shock, to process slowly, to maintain control. But even there, this was different, because the data was not contained. It was everywhere, replicating, cross-verified, impossible to retract. "You need to issue a response," one arbitrator said. Another shook their head. "To what?" A pause. "Denial requires contradiction." Another voice, quieter. "And there isn't one." That was the problem. There was no opposing narrative, no alternate explanation, just exposure. And exposure, once distributed, could not be undone. Across the galaxy, species that had once accepted Council authority without question began to revisit old decisions, old mandates, old corrections. Patterns emerged, connections formed, doubt spread, not violently, not chaotically, quietly, like a realization that had been waiting for the right moment. And that moment had arrived. Back on the returning fleet, the atmosphere had changed. Not tense, not relieved, focused. Ships moved in coordinated vectors, but without the rigid synchronization they once held. Communication remained open, transparent, nothing hidden, nothing assumed. On the flagship, Rethan stood at the center of the command deck, no longer holding everything together, no longer needing to. "External response?" he asked. A comms officer answered. "Widespread reception, high engagement across multiple systems." A pause. "Council has not responded." Rethan nodded once. "They will, because they had to." Silence was not an option anymore, not when the entire structure had been made visible. On a secondary display, a signal appeared. Small, familiar, human. Rethan looked at it, didn't open it immediately, just looked, because now he understood something he hadn't before. This had never been about stopping a fleet. It had been about showing something to everyone, and now everyone could see it. He activated the channel. No image, just a voice, calm, measured. "You did what was necessary." Rethan exhaled slowly. "No," he said. A pause. "We did what we could no longer avoid." Silence. Then a quiet response. That's usually how it starts. The signal ended. No further instructions, no follow-up, because there didn't need to be. The next phase didn't belong to one person or one fleet. It belonged to everyone who had seen the truth and now had to decide what to do with it. Across the galaxy, that decision was already beginning. And nothing would go back to the way it was. The collapse didn't happen with an explosion. There was no final vote, no dramatic announcement, no moment where everything simply ended. Instead, the Galactic Council began to unravel quietly. deliberately, inevitably. At first, it was procedural, emergency sessions called, internal reviews initiated, committees formed, language designed to slow things down, to contain, to stabilize, but none of it worked. Because the foundation had already shifted, and once a foundation shifts, everything built on top of it becomes uncertain. Across member systems, compliance began to change, not openly, not aggressively, subtly. Requests for clarification increased, mandates delayed, approvals questioned, nothing denied, just not accepted immediately. That was enough. On a core administrative world, a senior arbitrator stood before a chamber that had once operated with absolute authority. Now, it felt different, not weaker, exposed. "We are experiencing a temporary disruption in procedural alignment," they said. The words sounded correct, structured, controlled, but no one reacted, because everyone in the room had seen the data. And once seen, those words meant nothing. Across the galaxy, something new was forming. Not an alliance, not yet. Something looser, more organic. Species communicating directly, without filters, without intermediaries, without waiting for approval. It was inefficient, messy, unpredictable, and it worked. Better than anything the Council had enforced. On Earth, life hadn't stopped. Cities moved, people worked, ships launched and returned. From the surface, nothing had changed, but beneath it, everything had. In a quiet building overlooking an ocean that stretched beyond the horizon, a small meeting was taking place. No grand chamber, no elevated platforms, just a room, a table, and individuals from different species, sitting at the same level, talking, not negotiating, talking, listening. That was the difference. No one was trying to win. They were trying to understand, and that was unfamiliar. At the far end of the table, one of the alien representatives spoke carefully. "You destabilized a governing structure that had existed for centuries." Across from them, a human leaned back slightly. "No," they said. "We showed that it had already destabilized itself." A pause. The representative considered that, then asked, "And you believed this would lead to something better?" The human didn't answer immediately, because the question mattered. Then, simply, "We believed it would lead to something honest." Silence. Not uncomfortable, not tense, thoughtful. Because honesty was harder than order, harder than control, harder than systems that hid their flaws behind structure, but it lasted longer. On the returning fleet, Commander Rathan stood once again at the viewport. Earth was visible now, distant, blue, alive. Behind him, his crew moved with quiet efficiency, different than before, not less disciplined, more aware. He had reviewed the data again, all of it, not because he needed to, because he chose to. That was the difference now. Choice. It had changed everything. "You still don't think you won?" one of his officers said. Rathan didn't turn. "No," he replied. A pause. "We stopped something." Another pause. "Winning implies control." He looked out at the planet again. This wasn't control. It was something else, something harder to define and harder to replicate. Across multiple systems, a phrase began to circulate. Not official, not assigned, observed, repeated, remembered. A classification, not for weapons, not for fleets, for something else entirely. Humanity. Designation, unclassifiable. At first it was meant as a warning, a way to describe something that didn't fit, something unpredictable, something difficult to manage. Over time, the meaning shifted, because unclassifiable didn't mean unknown. It meant something else, something that refused to be reduced, to be simplified, to be controlled by expectation. On a distant station, a junior analyst asked a question that would later be recorded in multiple archives. If they're not the strongest, or the fastest, or the most advanced, a pause. Then what makes them dangerous? No one answered immediately, because the answer wasn't simple. It wasn't a single trait. It wasn't something that could be measured. Eventually, someone responded, quietly. They pay attention. Another pause. And they don't stop. That was it. Not power, not dominance, persistence, awareness, the willingness to look closer when everyone else had already decided. Back on Earth, the ocean moved the same way it always had, waves rising and falling, unconcerned with fleets, with councils, with decisions made far beyond its horizon. Inside that quiet building, the conversation continued. No final agreement, no unified conclusion, just progress. Slow, real, human, and somewhere, far from the noise of systems trying to rebuild themselves, a simple truth settled into place. When the galaxy sent everything it had, structure, power, certainty, to end one species, humanity didn't respond with greater force. They didn't respond with fear. They didn't respond the way anyone expected. They asked a question, and then they waited, because they understood something no one else had fully grasped. If you give people enough clarity and enough time, they will change their own decisions. And that is far more powerful than making the decision for them, because in the end, they didn't send a weapon. They didn't send a fleet. They didn't even send a leader. They sent something far more dangerous, a human who knew exactly where to look. And what would happen once everyone else did the same? And if you're human, subscribe, leave your like and comment below. Humanity stands.